Yes.
Do you mute it?
Sometimes.
Sometimes no?
Yeah.
They like listening.
Yeah, sometimes I like to hear
And
it.
they'll rate the stream, you know?
Yeah. You ever,
stream or else stream.
I've gotten piss mogged before. You know, I wrote a thread about it. Real ones know.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like when someone pisses next to you and they have like a bigger stream.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's pretty brutal.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared.
And I'm Mike.
Patreon shout out off the top. We've got one today in the platinum tier. Please read Worm by Wildbow is the username.
Okay.
I guess it's a book. I don't know.
Yeah, let's do it. And quick plug, my article, Who the Fuck Are These Men? Which sounds like a Posting Through It title. Which I didn't make the title, actually, Jared. The editor does that. And Mother Jones. This spring issue of Mother Jones is out, and there's a digital copy out now, and you can learn all about all the radical right activity that has been brewing in Idaho since Trump's resurgence.
There'll be a link to that in the description. The other link in the description from us is this week's listener-submitted music. This is from Nathaniel South, who listens to Posting Through It, but is also in a band called Loon, the band. From their Bandcamp, they describe themselves as playing, quote, twanged up rock and roll that is inspired by punk rock and hard knocks. So the transition music you'll hear today is their track called Indiana.
Yeah, and the other thing to plug is on April 11th in Washington, D.C. at Politics and Prose, you can... We'll put a link to this in the description too, right, Jared?
Oh, yeah.
I am doing a book event for Strange People on the Hill, my first book, which comes out on April 7th. And I believe if you go to Hachette's website, you can still get a discount of 20% with the code STRANGE20. And we are thinking about possibly doing some Posting Through It live stuff or something, some event. In connection with that. So if you are anywhere near the Washington, D.C. area, you can potentially start thinking about how you can be there that Saturday and get to know us. We'll be Looksmaxxing.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, shit. Well, you already know what this is about, probably. Also, probably when you clicked on the description, Jared he hasn't done it yet, but has created some beautiful image that lets you know this is about Looksmaxxing.
Yeah. Today, we're going to somewhat reluctantly, if I'm being honest, talk about Looksmaxxing. We thought we might cover something else this week, but I kind of feel like our hands have been forced. You know, mainstream media outlets are taking a sudden interest in one Looksmaxxing influencer in particular. His name is Braden Peters, but he's better known by his online handle, Clavicular. Lots of people are adopting the Looksmaxxing rhetoric, slang, lingo, whatever you want to call it, sometimes ironically, and sometimes in a way where it's kind of hard to tell.
Most of the people who are writing and analyzing this Looksmaxxing trend right now are men, full stop. Our guest today, Annie Kelly, is a researcher of online trends related to misogyny, conspiracy theories of far right, and she is not a man. And we really wanted her perspective for that reason. Clavicular is essentially the Michael Jordan of Looksmaxxing. He represents pockets of men online on places like TikTok and Instagram, as well as these specialized forums that are hyper obsessed with their physical appearance, particularly their face, and also their body too, like weightlifting, potentially with steroids, etc.
Yeah, they obsess over the geometry of their physiques and the minutia of their bodies, thinking they can sum it down into mathematic formulas to derive an idealized beauty standard. How symmetrical is your face? How wide are your shoulders compared to your waist? How strong is your jawline? There's a softer side to these discussions too. Men in these spaces will talk about skincare, diets, their workouts. But there's also a darker and harder side where men, like you said, Mike, are encouraging people to use steroids, adopt disordered eating habits, seek out surgical procedures. Some of them even claim to hit themselves in the face with hammers, aka bone smashing, in the hopes that their jaws will grow back stronger and fuller, if they are doing that.
The audience for this content, by all appearances, seems to be male, of course, but they're also alarmingly young and white, which is why critics associate it with eugenics. Some of the content pushed around in these spaces specifically targets teenage boys as they're developing through puberty. Not good, by the way. Many of the influencers in this movement are younger too. Clavicular is just 20 years old. He's a mere pup.
So what about Clavicular? He's having a moment right now, but it's still debatable how big his reach is beyond this really loud wall of traditional and social media hype. And, we kind of wonder how long this can last. Earlier this month, the New York Times published a profile that called him the quote-unquote first star born out of the Looksmaxxing community online. Mike really hated this article. You want to explain why?
Jared, I don't even think I mentioned this to you before, but actually, it wasn't just me who hated it. I taught this because I teach journalism students, and my class just happens to be young women, like they're like all 18, 19. And their next assignment is a profile. So I was like, well, let's look at all kinds of profiles, and I had them look at this. I was surprised to find that they all had a very similar reaction to me, which is, why is this in the New York Times? Why is they wanted to know, and they're of Clavicular's age, so they're just like, I don't understand why this is in the New York Times, and I don't think this was very clearly established in the story. Joe Bernstein wrote it, and Joe has wrote some very impactful stories on the far right, one of which was about Sam Hyde, the comedian who was associated with the neo-Nazi movement and other things. And, he became a target of a lot of bullying, online bullying from far-right extremists and things like that. And, I will tell you, he's not going to be getting very much bullying from this because maybe he is. I don't know, to be clear. But I don't think he would get it the same way he did for the stories that he wrote back in the day early on in BuzzFeed, because it doesn't really throw a punch at all. And that is what concerns me. The tone is written to me like it's like 1994 and you're profiling Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. This is the kind of thing that takes Clavicular from being a sort of freak, fringe internet celebrity into kind of mega stardom with glossy photos and so forth. The other thing it doesn't do, Jared, for me, is he doesn't dig up any dirt on Clavicular. Clavicular presumably had no anxiety about this coming out. He doesn't talk to anybody really from his high school, or at least they're not profiled, who could tell what he was like before he became Clavicular and stuff like that. We don't hear about his parents, who basically fought through, who allegedly gave up on trying to stop him from this. What do they think of this? Because if it were my son, I would be pretty disgusted. So yeah, this one really bothered me because I don't think Clavicular warrants this kind of treatment. But this particular show is about criticism, ours. We are critical as well as reporting, and I think it's important to look with a critical eye on why everyone is talking about this, not only on social media, but also apparently in traditional media as well.
We called out the New York Times story, but it's not alone. Clavicular's also been featured by GQ. He's appeared on Piers Morgan's program, The Adam Friedland Show recently, and others. He's reportedly making more than $100,000 a month. That's $1.2 million a year, folks. A little quick math there. Live streaming on a platform called Kick. He walked in New York Fashion Week, and he's steadily earning fans among right-wing social media personalities like Brett Cooper. She flew to New York City to watch him in that Fashion Week show.
That's kind of an insane life for a 20-year-old to lead. I don't know what you were doing at 20. I was probably stoned and seeing movies at the Angelica and Film Forum, like I was at NYU. So that's what I remember.
Yeah, people who know me in real life listen to this show. I'm not going to talk about what I was up to when I was 20.
If you've been in line in the last month or two, you've seen too much of this fucking content on your feeds. And everybody is talking in the Looksmaxxing slang, and it's completely outlandish and over the top, and people are doing it for a cheap laugh. I don't know. I'm not particularly crazy about the trend. I'm not Looksmaxxing, but just ironic Looksmaxxing posting. I don't like taking their culture and making it our costume, or whatever you would say. Yeah, it's loaded with slang terms and weird personalities that some of which we'll probably get into with Annie.
Yeah. I think the point we want to make on this episode is that this hyper-curated facade, and I mean that in like a extremely literal sense, we're talking about Looksmaxxing, right? This pursuit of aesthetic perfection in your bodily appearance is outlandish, it's cartoonish, it's attention-grabbing, just by how absurd it is. But beneath the surface is a political and social movement that's actually quite sinister. Joining the show, we have Annie Kelly, an award-winning journalist and researcher who covers digital culture related to topics like anti-feminism, conspiracy theories, and the far right. She is the UK correspondent for the QAA podcast, so if we have crossover listeners, you may have heard her there. Annie has a new podcast with QAA, a series worth checking out called Truly, Tradly, Deeply. We're excited to have her on today to talk about Looksmaxxing.
It's an honor to be invited. Thank you so much for having me.
What prompted this episode is all of this media interest in Looksmaxxing, specifically Clavicular, which is like the standout influencer of this space. But this has been around for years and years, right? The New York Times did a big glossy profile of Clavicular. But, years earlier, they had done a piece about Looksmaxxing as an online movement. So, where does this come from? How deep is that history?
Yeah, I mean, I have been finding a lot of the coverage, actually, of Clavicular a little bit shallow. And maybe this is unfair because maybe I'm expecting kind of a genealogy of manosphere. Subcultures stretching back further than a journalist writing a 1,500 word piece can really justify. Having said that, I think it's very important to understand the ideology, because Looksmaxxing and the Looksmaxxing subculture is not just trying to make yourself look good to attract women. And to understand that, I think we do need to go back to where it starts, which is with pickup artists in early noughties online culture. These were some of the earliest internet boards, essentially kind of dedicated to swapping tips and strategies for chatting up women. A little bit of lore about myself was I basically stumbled across this stuff when I was in my early teens because I wanted to know what dating would be like. So I have first-hand experience of these spaces, and I don't want to sound like I'm justifying them because obviously they were cesspools of misogyny back then. But I think if you go back compared to what the manosphere looks like now, it was very mild in comparison. A site that was born out of this space, though, that had a grievance with the pickup artist sphere was called Pickup Artist Hate. And this was essentially a site for users who had tried the pickup artist techniques and had found that they were lacking in some way, that they didn't work. They weren't suddenly becoming irresistible to women overnight.
You mean negging? Do you mean negging doesn't work with girls when you walk up to a girl in a bar, meet a woman in a bar, and you're like, your nose is a little funny. You mean surprisingly she doesn't like to go home with you? That's so weird. That's not intuitive at all.
Who would have guessed approaching romance like a chess game that you have a cheat code for would not pan out?
Yeah, I mean, I often think the cruel fact of a lot of pickup artist tricks is many of them will work if you are already a fairly charismatic person who's nice to hang around with. Do you know, many of them will kind of are sort of social strategies that, if you have a good or even decent kind of social sense, then yeah, sometimes women do like it when you kind of playfully make fun of them. But you're not mean about it, but and stuff like that, things like that. But you have to have a sense already, I think, of where the line is, a good sense of social intuition. And unsurprisingly, there's actually quite a large section of people who are looking up this stuff who do not have that, and therefore find that this stuff is actually just making them blunder and embarrass themselves. And Pickup Artist Hate was a site that was made for people who had found that. But it didn't really, its focus of ire wasn't really pickup artists as such, despite the name being called Pickup Artist Hate. It was women.
Right.
Because they hadn't worked the way that the pickup artists had told them they would. And so an ideology developed out of this forum, which said that there was actually nothing that you could do as a person to become more attractive to women, because essentially your destiny was written in stone based on what you looked like. And this was one of the early kind of incel forums as a result. People there started identifying as involuntarily celibate and very much viewed this as something that could not be changed. In fact, infamously, Elliot Rodger, the mass shooter who came out of this forum, was the reason that it was actually shut down because he was a known poster there. And then it became something called slut hate, which, it speaks for itself. And I think from then on, it branched out into something called looksism, which again was this kind of ideology that everything essentially is determined by how good looking you are, what you look like. And so this is where then the subculture of looksmaxxing comes from, which essentially kind of comes to this ideology which says that, it's nothing to do with how nice you are, it's nothing to do with how funny you are. Your success, not just with women, but in life in general, will be determined by what you look like. It therefore is imperative for you to go to extreme measures to be as good looking as possible. But I think we've got to remember this undercurrent of misogyny that comes out of it, because I think sometimes when people hear about looksmaxxing or write about looksmaxxing, they still very much have the attitude that these are guys who want to be good looking to attract women. I actually think it's better, and kind of you will find the subculture much less confusing if you think of it as a subculture that's about becoming better looking to reject women, to humiliate women, and to dominate women.
Can you explain that more?
I think it's probably plausible that the reason a lot of young guys will find themselves in this space in the first place is because they want to become better looking, because they are aware, and we can be honest, like, it is true that the better looking you are, the more attractive you will be to women, to men, to whoever you want to attract, there's a kind of like underlying logic to it, even if they obviously take it to extremes. But because this subculture is born out of incel subculture, it also has a great deal of resentment towards women for having to do this in the first place. The incel subculture kind of doesn't really view women desiring attractive men, straight women desiring attractive men. I should say that a lot of this is just kind of completely heteronormative, so I apologize if I'm talking in a kind of heteronormative way as I describe it. They don't really view that as a rational impulse or an understandable one. It's very much viewed as an insult and as one of the reasons that women are essentially inferior to men. So there is kind of a great deal of resentment built up in this ideology around women's attraction to men. And even if you essentially are the stereotypical teenager who wants to get chicks and gets kind of drawn into this, as Clavicular in his biography seems to suggest that he was, I don't think it seems that you will stay that way if you become very ingrained in the subculture. It becomes much more about what they call ascending. You're trying to look as good as possible to impress other men, to attract women, but also I think, you want to attract them not because you want to like date them or because you actually enjoy being around them, It's because of the level of status that will give you, that attraction will give you. Having actually watched a few clavicular streams, it seems something that a lot of journalists seem to be missing is that these dates and interactions that he has with women that are live streamed, he largely insults them. They ask him for a rating and he says to a beautiful young girl he's met at a club, your mid-face is too wide and your I don't know, your nasolabial area is recessed and all of this kind of stuff. And I think there's a real savage pleasure in his audience, his Looksmaxxing audience, that are living vicariously through that.
And presumably some of them haven't hammered their faces like he has or whatever to try to get whatever look he has yet, but they may just enjoy seeing, in the same way I like to watch Juan Soto of the New York Mets hit a home run. I can't do it. They can watch this guy who's he's on the battlefield of dating. They can watch their favorite dater go and insult these women and show off how he is. I want to ask you a question that I had written, a component that I have not seen addressed in any of the profiles about it or anything about it, which is this idea that, looks are a science, and that is what women respond to.
Yeah.
I'm bisexual, but, so I have a little bit of a, more of a thing, but women, in my experience, much more than men, do not necessarily go for, the face is symmetrical or this. And I'll give you one example of that. That has been on my mind recently. The French singer Serge Gainsbourg, right? Who's kind of funny looking, but literally could walk anywhere in France in 1971 and women would be just all over him because of his tremendous charisma, his humor, his ability, his songwriting ability, his captivating stage presence. And it's to me, it feels so foreign to actual sex pairings between men and women. It just doesn't seem like at all how it works. I don't know if you could weigh in on that.
Yeah. Well, I saw quite a fascinating little bit of dialogue between Clavicular and the comedian talk show host Adam Friedland. Adam Friedland essentially raised this point to him. Do you know? He said, I don't get it. I see beautiful women with not that attractive men all the time. And Clavicular had a couple of answers for this, which are both standard in the manosphere and also kind of contradict each other, which is to be expected, I think, from a ideology, which kind of just revolves around resentment towards women and then kind of picks your answers for that. So he said, well, yeah, it's not necessarily looks. Looks are just one very important part of the puzzle. But if you have enough money, if you have enough resources, then sure, your beautiful women will still throw themselves at you. It's just harder to do that than it is to become beautiful. But then he also had a point where he said, which I found really fascinating, because I think this comes back to the really deep ideological nature of Looksmaxxing, which a lot of people miss, where he said, oh, well, actually, those women aren't that beautiful. That if you actually assess them according to this objective scale that we've developed on our forums, you would see actually, they're probably looks matched with the guy that they're dating, but we just think that they're beautiful because we're attracted to them, which I think is a really hard thing to get your head around if you haven't spent a lot of time on these forums, because we think, well, I'm attracted to them, they're probably good looking as a result, but because they have this mathematical scale by which they supposedly can rate any human being, this is why he ends up, I think, saying that Sydney Sweeney, for instance, the actress, is actually only a 3. But men, because they're so attracted to her, because of her body, they don't notice this.
So I have a question for you. I was just curious your take. This idea of that there is this attainable mathematical perfection that a male can achieve in his appearance, right? I mean, this archetype is muscular to a degree. It has, they talk about the rate, how far apart are your mouth and your eyes? How wide is your face? How strong is your jawline? And how does that compare to your shoulders and that sort of thing? underneath all of that, that image is also white, right?
Yeah.
In nearly every context. In fact, there's been people of color in this community that have been chased off in the past and attacked, saying, well, you can never achieve this because you're not a white person. Do you think it would be fair to also, when we're talking about the ideology undergirding this online movement, to also think about it in the terms of it being eugenicist?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very explicitly eugenicist. Lots and lots of incel writing will often kind of talk about I think in quite sort of fatalistic terms. I mean, this is what they call blackpilling, right? And we can talk a little bit maybe about later about the incel influence on digital language, which I've always found fascinating, the way so much internet slang actually just dates back to incel forums. But yeah, the kind of the black pill, essentially, that it would be better if you'd never been born if you were born below a certain level of attractiveness, which quite explicitly correlates to race, as you're right to point out, Jared. I mean, one thing I hesitate to call incel subculture white supremacist is because it is actually very, very diverse. A lot of incel users aren't white. And I think this creates a kind of interesting dialectic on incel forums as a result, in which users will often be bemoaning the fact that they live in a society where there is a white beauty standard, which they, as you point out, will never live up to, while at the same time kind of also buying into that white beauty standard as an objective scale. So yeah, all I can say is, I think it's an interesting contradiction that exists in incel subculture and largely in the manosphere in general, which has diversified a lot over the last 10 years.
So we see a lot of different women on these streams. I gotta say, like, some of it really reminds me of pro wrestling. Like, it does not seem real.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like there's just like, there's a lot of things going on here. I will cop to finding that guy androgenic, whatever that gigantic Looksmaxxer.
Yeah.
Like, I did find the videos, the clips that people share of him like just going out hunting the ASU frat leader or whatever it was. For people who don't know this, it was I can't even explain it because I'll get it wrong and someone will. It's so stupid. Don't even. If you haven't heard it, don't worry about it. But like, there's this gigantic Looksmaxxer who is like 6'5", and I want to point out something very quickly about that guy. Does not seem attractive. There is nothing soft about him. It's like a hunter. He looks like a Terminator or something, right? Which is not usually something that you want to like go to bed with. And he's just like, walking around. It looks like pro wrestling to me. Like, you're like, oh, I like androgenic. He's like 6'5", and like I like clavicular. He's like the slightly, I don't know, twinkie, like pretty guy who goes after like these girls. And then the ASU frat leader, whose body looks really strange to me, by the way, like just too much muscle, whatever's going on there with steroids or whatever. I don't know what it is. Okay, whatever. But it looks like pro wrestling where you bring out a bunch of different guys and they fight, but without the wrestling. Like, there's just sort of like, they're kind of just going
stand
around
next to each other.
Yeah.
They attempt to frame mug each other.
Yes. And then there are these women that kind of appear on these streams. And to me, I have like an ongoing debate in my head about how much they could even really want these guys. And I don't want to be in denial and be like, well, he is now, unfortunately, like becoming a sort of B-list celebrity, Clavicular. So that may be attractive to people. And according to this, he makes like $1 million a year in streaming already at age 20. So that may be attractive to people. But I can't help but think that these women want to access the stream, like want to be streamers themselves or want to be seen on a stream or become celebrities. And that's why they're there. And there's this clip of this, recent one of a guy who he claims, that he's been dating this girl for a year. And, oh, Clavicular, please give me my girl back. And to me, it sounds fake. Jared, do you have the clip of that? Can we play it?
We'll hop in the spinner soon. We'll go to my place, all right? Yeah.
What, bro? You can't steal my girl, bro. It's Valentine's Day, bro. You can't steal my girl. Come on, man. You're a good guy. I know you're a good guy.
Past Valentine's Day was
No,
yesterday.
but like the kindness of your heart, bro. Come on. You're a good guy. I know you're a good guy.
Brother, 18 minutes ago, Valentine's Day ended, so you're gonna have to buck up.
I'm good. Bro, come, dude, 1 year, bro.
Why is this guy begging me?
Come on, man.
1 year.
That's literally the lamest shit ever. I know I am.
1 year, man.
All I do is win, win, win. In the background, it sounds like the worst time anyone's ever had to be.
I know.
But
I can't believe they're still playing that song in clubs. That was the
can't-
song they were playing when I was at
going out
university.
hitting the club on Valentine's Day so
worst
you can
clubs ever.
get down with DJ Khaled.
I'm sure it would spike his cortisol levels if he went to the kind of club that I prefer. But I guess my question is any maybe some of it's real, but I mean, is it fair to say that some of this is fake? Because that whole interaction just doesn't seem like the way humans interact.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I don't have any insider knowledge on that clip, but I also saw it and thought, yeah, that's not real. And it's very common for these, I think they're called IRL streamers on Kick, these people who stream themselves for like 16 hours a day, just going around their day, going about their day to set things up, to have an entourage, a team who will essentially kind of, these people won't necessarily be like paid actors or anything kind of really super formal, but there'll be people there in the club and they say, hey, do you want to act out this scene for us? We've got so and so many subscribers, things like that, to kind of a bit of play acting, a little bit of drama. My guess is that's probably what was happening there. But I think it's worth pointing out because I think this is an interesting development in the manosphere in general, which is when I did my PhD about the manosphere, and when I was writing about it, it was largely text-based. And it was also not a super comfortable place for women to be involved. There were always, women involved in the manosphere, female figures, but it was hard. It was hard to have that level of scrutiny in your personal life, that kind of level of hostility towards women in your fan base, and to scrape by unscathed. And there's a great many women who tried and kind of eventually ended up bowing out. One thing that I have found interesting with the rise of platforms like Twitch and Kick, but also things like OnlyFans, is that there has become a much more monetary incentive to be a woman involved in the manosphere. And you can actually now monetize the humiliation in a way that the women I was writing about never really could. I'll give an example from a different sphere, but podcasts like Fresh and Fit or the Whatever podcast have created this model, which I'm still a little bit astonished by and how successful it is, where they will have usually one or two male hosts, and then they will get on weekly a new set of women. Some are OnlyFans models, some are Instagram influencers, some are aspiring Twitch streamers and stuff like that. And for hours, literally hours, they will sit around and dissect their personal lives. They'll call them sluts. They'll, laugh at them. They'll mock them. They'll degrade them. They'll encourage their audience to send in donations so they can, do text to speech and read out things calling them hoes and things like that. But it obviously benefits these women to sort of sit and kind of just, take it and kind of act a little bit offended and things like that. But they're laughing all the way to the bank because, at the end of the day, their subscribers will go up. And so there's a kind of interesting dynamic here, I think, going on, which is that it's actually, the manosphere has become more profitable all round, but it's actually become more profitable to become one of the manosphere's villains for a woman. And I think probably with at least some of these women who are going up to Clavicular and saying, oh, rate me, I think I'm a 10. And then he kind of gives her a dressing down and says, oh, actually, according to the objective scale, you're barely worth my attention. My guess is there is also an element of, what's the wrestling term?
Kayfabe.
Kayfabe, completely slipped my mind, going on here, where that woman actually didn't really want to hit on Clavicular or have him rate her or something like that. But she's aware that this will become a clippable moment, that there's actually nothing his audience, and indeed social media in general, wants to see more than him dressing down a pretty young woman.
There are no 10s, I think.
Yeah,
Right?
there are no 10s.
He's
That's
like,
right. It's an impossible standard. I think.
Remember when Trump used to say the wall? He'd be like, the wall just got 10 feet higher. He used to say back when he used to pretend that he was going to build a wall. He'd be like, the wall just got 20 feet higher or whatever. It's like 10, we're talking about some sort of weird ethereal being that doesn't exist and like glows in the dark, right? It's not even a real person. Because he's looking at Audrey Hepburn or whatever, and he's like, she's a 6. Like, it's like,
yeah, I think obviously it's constantly getting updated, the scale with new celebrities. But I think last thing I saw, they were saying that Timothée Chalamet was a 4, which feels a little bit harsh, But yeah, I think there's an incentive essentially if you're a woman kind of trying to launch your career, to get your face out there, even if it is on one of these interminable streams. Because I have to say, one thing I was really struck by when I first started watching these clips and then the streams, and maybe I shouldn't have been at all, looking back on Clavicular's life story, is just how awkward and bad at talking to people he is. He's just really, really bad at it.
He's just a dope.
Yeah. I mean, an element of it feels a bit like a Victorian morality story, about the dangers of focusing on vanity without cultivating any other virtues. I feel there's something kind of like Wildian to it, watching him kind of stumble through conversations with young women where he's just kind of just referencing memes and kind of just sort of, saying just the kind of same sort of like Gen Z sort of slang, just sort of stringing together a sentence. It sort of feels a bit like, I don't know, I don't want to sound like I'm really nostalgic for the good old days of pickup artistry, but I do sort of look back to, the early noughties pickup artist scene, and I do think, well, even if it didn't really work for a lot of people, it was, to a certain extent, trying to teach men to be fun to be around, to be, to be good company, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you give, people a recipe and you get a good cook and they make a fantastic meal, and then you give it to somebody who can't cook or is really not well practiced and it tastes like crap. The ingredients aren't necessarily good. But you brought up that thing about negging where it can be fun. Yeah, I've actually had women tease me, right, where it would be like sort of like make fun of, like I'm like, oh wow, you really like that band, huh, or something.
Yeah,
that's a neg. And then but I know it's also like I also know they're flirting with me, and it is very disarming, right? It's like that. But then if you have somebody come up and be like, that band sucks and so do you, like like a guy saying that, it's like not gonna work. So yeah, I mean, at least there was an attempt. I don't want to. Now I feel like I'm crediting. I don't want to credit the.
I genuinely do feel like
we
it was a scummy subculture, but we did, compared to what came afterwards, we didn't know how good we had it.
Trying to communicate this thing where it's sort of like, the men have issues of confidence, I think in part because of this sort of patriarchal structure of the culture, right?
Yeah.
Where they're under tremendous pressure. They're like, men are dying fast and like feeling tremendous pressure, partly because of the world men created for themselves. And they're trying to figure out how to crack the code and just get somebody to be cozy with and watch TV and have a little kiss every once in a while, so they can feel better. So like, yeah, this feels different. And the other thing about it, and I think it's very easy to just look at this and be like, this is gay, this feels really gay to me. But it does feel, I must say, it does feel like it is almost like taking the woman out of the heterosexual equation, which is why I think people are quickly saying this is gay. People who are critical of it online. I'm talking about people, not talking about like, refined leftist critics, but like the average person online who's a sports guy be like, okay, this stuff's gay. You'll see them in the replies all the time. And I think it's like, it does feel like a little bit like that to me. Like it's just like males focusing on males with the woman as a prop.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because there's so much of the manosphere that, as you say, will eventually come under this level of scrutiny. And I think when people call it gay, I think what they are mistaking for gay is actually a political fetishization of masculinity and men.
Of like male supremacy,
Of
basically.
male supremacy, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because sometimes it really does kind of come across as an erotic fetishization as well. But I think it is ultimately, if you kind of want to go back to old second wave feminist theory, there's actually kind of nothing gay about this kind of heteronormative, heterodominant kind of valorization of masculinity. But certainly some of the ways that it plays out when you sort of take that logic, that kind of heterosexual logic, to its utter extreme, I mean, it can be really comical. I remember reading a thread in some old bodybuilding forums, which are another huge influence in incel culture, which kind of had the same devolution as the pickup artist culture. Guys who want to get ripped to pick up women ultimately find that isn't just like the secret life hack to romantic success, and then devolve into misogyny. And and Bronze Age pervert came out of this scene. And
that guy.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, I remember there's one thread that just has always struck with me, where a bunch of users from this bodybuilding / incel / manosphere forum all get together and start talking about how objectively, if you take away all sexual attraction, women aren't actually that beautiful and men are much more beautiful. And, they sort of say, well, obviously we're just kind of programmed. That's just sort of, that kind of chip in our brain that wants us to reproduce, that is, clouding our judgment and making us think that the female form is beautiful. When actually, if you think about it, it's kind of soft, it's squishy. It's nothing like these kind of clean, masculine, like hard lines, which you find in the male body, which is obviously objectively superior. And I find it really interesting because it's the philosopher Klaus Tiverlate in his book Male Fantasies kind of really drills down into this impulse in proto-fascist literature in Germany. It's a male supremacist impulse, but it's ultimately kind of a fascist one as well, which has so elevated the kind of masculine, the strong, the dominant over what is seen as kind of the feminine and the weak, that it ultimately, despite being extremely homophobic, extremely politically opposed to LGBT people, also has this element of male eroticism.
Do you think that could be a reason why it feels like this stuff's getting pickup lately? I mean, especially in the United States. I mean, we're in a fascist hellscape, with federal agents murdering people in the street. Just the nastiness in our political and social culture right now is so bleak and so poisonous. I mean, even in Clavicular's case, if we look at who he's hanging around, it's people like Andrew Tate, it's people like Nick Fuentes. He lives in a condo owned by Aiden Ross. All of these guys are like hardcore, have very far-right politics, even though Clavicular claims to be apolitical. This is who he surrounds himself with. This is the pocket that he's in. Do you think there is a relationship between the rise of far-right politics and the visibility of this kind of stuff? I mean, do you see that as connected?
100%. And on the Nick Fuentes point, my colleague on the QAA podcast, Liv, has actually just put out an episode for us about Clavicular. And one thing that she points out is that Nick Fuentes was actually pretty instrumental in his rise as an influencer. And that's not coincidental. Do you know, like, even though Clavicular kind of, has sort of disavowed politics and says, oh, yeah, I don't care about that at all.
Politics is jester.
It's just, yeah. It's clear that Fuentes sees the appeal of someone like Clavicular, and I think probably, well, both of them, I would say, are the only influences, essentials, popular influences to kind of come out of the incel space. So I think that's quite significant. Yeah, in terms of its sort of salience for the political moment, yes. I mean, one thing when I was working on my series about trad wives that I couldn't stop noticing once I started researching it was that there was this element of super politicized trad wives who are, kind of clearly commenting on every little feature that comes out of the culture war and every part of the news cycle and, clearly news junkies, essentially. But there was a much bigger portion of them that I thought were much more passively inculcating right-wing values. And by that, they would often, do a similar kind of dance, disavowing politics. That's not really my thing. I'm not interested in that. I just think I want to focus just on me and my little family. And I think it'll make you happier just to focus on you and your little family too. When I look at people like Clavicular and all of the kind of bodybuilding, Looksmaxxing side of the right wing, I kind of see something similar, which is essentially kind of telling their audience to drop out, to stop paying attention to the news, to stop paying attention to the cycle, to kind of just let things flow as they may, and just serve all of their attention to, well, in women's case, it was like the home, but in men's case, it's much more often just their bodies. I find it a funny parallel to some of the most egregious pop feminism of the 2010s, which was kind of doing a similar thing of saying, self-care is so important as a woman. In fact, it's revolutionary for you to buy this shampoo. There seems to be something similar going on, which is in some of the kind of bodybuilding spaces, which is saying, it's so important that the powers that be are so afraid of a strong alpha male populace that can take on the government anytime they want. So therefore, you need to be spending all of your free time at the gym and pushing steroids and taking and researching vitamin supplements and things like that. And I sort of think well, actually, if I were the powers that be, I would feel intensely relaxed about a huge section of the population just turning all of their attention into themselves. I couldn't think of anything that would be more liberatory for me. The great evil woke powers that be, frankly.
Interesting too. I just want to point out that in addition to wanting to throw out that women want to sleep with Stav, the podcaster. Women want to sleep with Jack Black, and because they think they're funny and cool and they like their thing. And sometimes it also doesn't have to do with money. Also, sometimes it's a guy who works hard and is just cool and not necessarily the mind blowing. It's just it is so weird, but. It feels like we've come as a culture beyond just it obviously being, to me, it has to be a symptom of fascism that somebody with absolutely zero talent like Clavicular is famous for hammering his jaw to look a certain way. I mean, I don't need I'd go back in time and throw that in the mix. I'd be like, oh no, fascism happens in the future. But
yeah, just to interrupt, I'm not totally convinced he was doing the jaw smashing thing.
He may not have been. I don't know. I don't know.
I get a bit of a sense that, again, I don't fully know.
This is good. Interject this.
Here's my conspiracy. I kind of sense that he has a bit of a, largely talentless, but I think he actually has a bit of a flair for self-promotion and kind of exaggerating all of the extreme things that he's doing. I think probably initially to gain just attention and excitement on the Looksmaxxing forums that he was on, and then I think sort of taking it to social media and things like that. It's I just sort of sometimes get a bit of a sense that that he kind of has a canny understanding essentially for stuff that's a little bit shocking, a little bit outrageous, and that sometimes that might be what's going on with the I'm going to get double jaw surgery, or I'm going to, break my legs so I can be an inch taller and things like that.
That is fair. And I sometimes overlook the talent of self-promotion, which is something I do not possess. Partly maybe because I don't have it. I'm like, this guy doesn't have no talent. Oh yeah? Are you in the New York Times, Mike? But I don't know if this is a question, but maybe it's a talking point or whatever. I was like, when I I'm 46. When I, was first sexually active or whatever, this would be like the 90s, right? Mid 90s. I now view like sex as like three reasons for sex. There are like three main things here are going on. One is to have children, in some cases, not for everybody. Like there's a sort of spiritual sort of comfort, kind of the Marvin Gaye sexual healing aspect of it. Very important for some people, very important for many people. And the other one is just pleasure, right? It's just for pleasure, right? Same reason we enjoy going to the cinema. Same reason we enjoy reading a book, right? It was like, it's pleasurable. And, obviously, like during, when I first discovered it, I was interested in all the things that you could do after she consents, right? Right? It's like, think about look at all the different things we can do. Like all this, look at this. Could we do that? That's crazy after consent, right? And it seems like the culture, like the sort of Trumpy, fascist male culture these days is completely removes the pleasure part of it. It's either just, or the sexual healing. It's just like about getting there. Sometimes removes consent too. That's a very important part of it. Like, let's be honest. But it's really just like she has the babies and whatever, and like I get in the door, and he actually says like that's sex enough for me to know that she could do it. I find that completely insane, and maybe that's the most fascist thing of all, that to not want to experience that, right? Well, what even is that? Where's the pleasure in that? Just to me, it seems like a really creepy world for young boys to grow up in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, this is where trying to strip Looksmaxxing of its roots in the manosphere and incel subculture necessarily leads to a kind of impoverished understanding of what's going on when Clavicular says, I'd rather actually not have sex. It's a just waste of my time and energy. It's enough to know that she wants to, that I could. Because I think, again, that comes back to this understanding. And even though we were being nice about the old pickup artists 10 minutes ago, let's be real, they started this in a sense, at least in an internet subculture sense. I can't say that the pickup artists started patriarchy in general. But they did start this kind of understanding of sex as an act of domination, essentially. And what often emerged out of these spaces, which, again, I think there's actually not really anything necessarily wrong, I think, with thinking, hey, I'd like to be more attractive to the opposite sex. I'm going to look up tips on how to do that. Like, I don't think that as an impulse is a bad thing. What I think was so damaging about so many of these cultures was how once you get enough people with this idea together and kind of get them talking, is how often they would come up with these ideologies that would sort of breed resentment about the fact that they had to do that, anger about the fact it wasn't working, and would try and find ways to essentially denigrate women for having forced them into this position in the first place. And I think there's a interesting economic basis for why the manosphere has exploded in the internet era. And I think it's because we're actually at a slightly unprecedented moment in human history where increasingly for women getting a male partner is no longer an act of survival, which it was for a very, very long time. Even for working class women who obviously always had jobs, pre the feminist movement, pre women's liberation, a lot of those jobs were not well paid enough for you to be able to survive by yourself, let alone support children.
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't that long ago that women became able to get credit cards in their own name.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just everything was stacked against them. They had to be married. They had to have.
They had to be.
They had to basically have a sponsor.
Yeah. And, with the removal of a lot of these, the basic survival incentives to be with a male partner, that has come at a loss for a lot of straight men. A lot of straight men have just frankly lost out from that. Some people will say, well, men don't lose anything from feminism. It's not a zero-sum game, but actually that is a loss. It's now harder for them to get a partner than it was in the times when it was either sticking with him or destitution. And I think that we can often forget when we're kind of talking about internet subcultures, the way that some forum came out of another forum, the way that this ideology, this way that this language developed, that I think there is actually just like quite a hard material factor in the way that a lot of this stuff has taken off. This kind of desire to be attractive to women, but also, this very deep anger towards women. A lot of the stuff constantly revolves around the idea that women are too picky these days. Women have got an inflated sense of their own worth. And they'll attribute this to various factors, to dating apps, to social media, the fact that, that lots of women get lots of likes if they post a bikini picture on Instagram and things like that. But I think they actually might be speaking to a much more brutal economic fact, which is that for many women, it's not an act of survival anymore to have a male partner. And that has disempowered, I think, heterosexual men on the dating scene. And I think a lot of this manosphere anger comes from that.
Too bad. Now you have to actually be of some value to her in a way that is
to actually be a pleasant person.
You have to provide company that she enjoys, and have to be a good kisser, and have to be able to share meals together that she enjoys. Tough for you. Sorry.
So just wrapping up here, this type of stuff has certainly grown in its profile, right? I mean, this Clavicular guy, stupid name I can't pronounce. He's on Adam Friedland's show. He's getting the New York Times profile. He's with Piers Morgan. GQ did a write-up. Is this stuff actually exploding online? Is it actually like certainly this stuff is getting more visible, but do you see this as a movement or a subgroup of the larger manosphere movement that is gaining traction? Because if that's the case, it seems like there's obviously the ideological risk, but this also seems, if it is the type of thing that they're advocating, bone smashing, taking steroids, and mixing these cocktails of various nutritional supplements and extreme fasting, disordered eating, all of that, to an audience that is largely comprised of teenagers and young men, aside from ideology, it also seems insanely dangerous. Some of the things that get recommended could kill people.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like that's been missing from a lot of the coverage. But, as we wrap up here, I'm curious, as somebody who spent so much time looking into this issue, when you see these stories and see these features and stuff, do you get a sense of oh, finally, people are catching up to this, people are talking about this, or do you feel something else?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think sometimes the focus on the most absurd examples of it, the most absurd examples of a phenomenon. I mean, there's so much that's absurd about Clavicular. It's absurd that he pretends or actually does smash his face with a hammer, whatever he does. The language that is deliberately used around him is deliberately comic. It's deliberately absurd because, yeah, as I said before, there's always been a real fascination with incel language, and a lot of words that we kind of use in internet slang, things like something maxing or blackpilling, doomerism, chads, beaters, all the rest of it. It all comes back from incel forums. They really have an incredible amount of influence on digital slang. So I think there's always been this level of fascination, but the focus on the most absurd examples, I think, might mask the fact that there is something going on. I think eating disorders in young men are massively rising. I think they're still not on level with eating disorders with the young women, but I think we are basically seeing slightly unprecedented levels in terms of how many young men are getting diagnosed with things like anorexia and orthorexia, which to me suggests, I know that these are complex psychological phenomena, and I don't want to simply attribute them to one trend or another, but it to me suggests that is something slightly emblematic, even if deliberately exaggerated to the most distorted extremes in someone like Clavicular, that there are body image pressures on young men with social media, with even just dating apps, things like Tinder and Hinge and all the rest of it, which are all solely image based. I think probably there are a lot more pressure on young men to look a certain way. And it wouldn't surprise me, essentially, if as a result, you were seeing kind of influencers and people giving advice, but essentially kind of raising in their profile the more extreme they advise you to go. Kind of similar to the old, well, they probably still exist now, but the old kind of pro-Anna blogs and forums and kind of the 2010s and things like that. The kind of more extreme, the more kind of outrageous, the more extreme the kind of images were, the more extreme the advice would be given on starving yourself and things like that, the more followers those blogs would get. And it's kind of easy, I think, when you're seeing it about young women to understand that is a result of a culture which is demanding kind of ever increasing sort of perfection from female bodies. But I think we might be starting to see kind of something similar with men, and that probably is what the fascination with figures like Clavicular are representing.
I have just one last question, which is this: you can be as wrong as possible. We won't know right now. Where do you see Clavicular? His name's Braden Peters, right? Braden Peters. I hate his stupid name so much. I know we've used it throughout this whole thing. But where do you see Mr. Peters in 10, 20 years? I ask that because this is a young man's game. And I'm just curious, like, what you think will happen to this guy? Because I have my thoughts, but I just want to hear yours.
I mean, you could ever have like a normal life after this.
No, definitely not. And I mean, yeah, as you say, it's a young man's game. I am not really convinced that he is charismatic or funny or charming enough to kind of move into something else after he's been frame mogged by a younger man. Having said that, I don't want to be unfair. He's only 20 years old. I probably wasn't super fascinating when I was 20 years old. People develop, people cultivate kind of different aspects of themselves as they age. I don't want to write off the poor young man right now. Maybe who knows? Maybe he'll write the next great American novel.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say I'm gonna take the under on that one. If there's a Polymarket odds, I'm ready to vote. I'm ready to bet now. I think he says reading spikes his cortisol levels or something. So he said something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. As I understand it, he streams sort of like 15 hours a day and then spends the rest of his time either sleeping or watching clips of himself to see what he can do better. I mean, there is. And obviously injecting peptides or whatever next and steroids or whatever into himself. I mean, there is something to be said about just how, and I kind of mentioned this before, how kind of auto-cannibalistic this culture is. It's so focused on the self. It's so focused on the image. Kind of hard to imagine moving on to anything else. Again, this will kind of maybe sound like I'm praising other terrible manosphere influencers and things like that, but Nick Fuentes or Andrew Tate or people like that, they are kind of at least amusing. Do you know? They have like a comic talent, their kind of delivery and things like that. They're performers. And I guess, yeah, I sort of don't really see that in Clavicular so much as somebody who is kind of willingly being a kind of live streamed, I want to say freak show, but that sounds kind of too mean. I don't mean that in the sense that he's a freak, but
I don't think it's too mean. I just want to say I don't think it's too mean. If I can just throw in, because I have a thought. Yeah. So there was a gay identified account who said that like back in the 60s, late 60s or whatever, early, he would have been part of Andy Warhol's factory, and he would have he would have had some sort of an affair with like one guy or whatever, and he would have been murdered at like age whatever.
Yeah.
And it spoke to something that I said, someone said, I said, this guy's going to be dead and like whatever. I'm not predicting that because I don't want to predict that for anybody. It's terrible. It's terrible vibes. But there is one of the reasons it's a dead end is because it's so superficial and so contrary to the nature of development. Most of my beard is white, actually. Now taking a look at it. Okay. I haven't looked at it like deeply in a while. Look, it's part of, it's part of it, right? I just saw Wallace Shawn perform The Fever in Greenwich Village. He was amazing at age 82. Part of aging. With the Betty Friedan thing about, like she has a whole book about aging. Like, that's what it's about. It's about, it's about letting go of that. And he has created a culture around not letting go of certain youthful appearance, aspects. And I to me, it's just like, what is there, if it's not death in a literal sense, it's death in the cultural sense for him, or in an influencer sense. I don't know what do? You can't it's like the guy who's that weird tech guy, Jared, who like wants to keep himself alive forever and claims he's aging backwards.
Yeah.
This stuff is insane to me. All this. People have to accept death and accept aging. It's my personal thing. Anyway.
No, I mean, I really agree. I mean, I'll sound very guru-like here, dispensing my pearls of wisdom.
Is it Brian Johnson, by the way? Is it something like that?
It is Brian Johnson.
Okay, that's right.
It's always seemed to me, and I'm glad I grasped this quite early, it's always seemed to me like a huge, huge mistake to really, really value your youth and your beauty, to place a high premium on that, because it's the one thing that you're constantly running out of. Do you know? So I think I just sort of grasped quite early on, even when I was very young, I think, that it wasn't a good idea to become enamored with being young, because it felt like a bit of a losing strategy for life. It's a way to make yourself miserable. Yeah, I actually, now I'm a parent, and I kind of think a bit about being a parent as well. There's a certain seductive pull to kind of, getting attached to your baby and thinking how sweet and baby-like they are, and I wish they could just stay like this forever. But if you think that, if you start to, kind of like dwell on that and think that, then you are making the act of parenting become miserable, because they're not staying a baby forever. They're always growing. And I think I see a bit of that in, I wish I could just say it was the freak shows like Clavicular. Honestly, I see a lot of it in Gen Z social media culture, just in general, a kind of terror of aging, and this is in just general kind of what me and my colleague on Truly Tried Deeply, Megan, called the girl internet. Focus on anti-aging products age 23 and things like that. Here's how I look so young age 25. Stuff like that. It seemed to me like a very dangerous and quite miserable way to live. Again, I kind of speculate in a slightly vulgar materialist sense that it's something to do with a age demographic where aging doesn't necessarily equal status and material gains, maybe in a way that it would have for previous generations, where they might have viewed it as a bit of a trade-off. Sure, I have grey hairs now, but I'm a bit more economically stable. I've got a house. Maybe for generations where that is no longer the promise of aging, maybe aging becomes more terrifying itself. I don't know. Yeah, as I say, it's just pure speculation on my part. But I see a lot of it everywhere, and I think it's very sad.
Yeah, I've always thought, well, I haven't always thought, but for a while have come to understand the temperance of life, the end of it, right? From the second you're born, you start dying, right? And that's what makes it worth it. That's what makes it vivid and beautiful. And it gives you a reason to engage with the world around you and to appreciate things as they come. And this format, this incentive structure, I guess, if you will, of these online cultures, I think kind of robs life of the things that can make it beautiful. But on that big note, as I put down my comically sized bong here and tuck it behind my desk, we've been talking to Annie Kelly. Thanks so much for joining us. Last question. Guess get this on posting through it, what kind of music you fucking with. Because this is a music podcast, first and foremost.
Oh, nice. So I like a lot of modern kind of Western music, actually. I inherited it from my dad, who's Irish, and American guy. I don't know if Americans know this, but Irish people love country and Western music.
Oh, wow.
I think
I actually did not know that.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
New Yorkers like the Pogues. If that's like a nice trade-off, we can have that. We can have that.
Yeah, I think there's something to do with maybe a kind of a similar musical heritage happening there, which kind of branched off at one point. Anyway, yeah. So I grew up listening to old style country and Western things like Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton and things like that. And yeah, as a result, I don't know, when I'm just trying to zone out, I like to listen to music that makes me feel like I'm a cowboy riding through New Mexico or something like that.
I did not expect this answer, but I love it.
Yeah, I think this is the first guest who's recommended some country music on this show. All right. Well, Andy, thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
Thank you.
Cornfields planted on the grave.